Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to debunk the notion that Boris Johnson is making good on his promise to provide extra NHS funding. The promised money is yet more of the usual Conservative smoke and mirrors tricks. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So back in 2016, during the Brexit referendum campaign, Boris Johnson paraded a bus that said that we pay £350 million a week to the EU and that we should give it to the NHS instead. The £350 million a week to the EU, of course, was a lie. We don't pay that, as was the notion that he would ever give money to the NHS. In fact, one of the many tragic cases that Brexit has caused is the widespread anguish of parents voting leave on the basis of this NHS pledge and now revealing to media sources that their doctors have said that the life-saving medicines that their children are in need of are in serious doubt in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Can you imagine anything more heartbreaking than a scenario where in a few years' time a mother has to face up to the fact that she voted to kill her sick child? Yes, it was foolish to believe the pledge back in 2016. None of the people promoting the bus had any control over NHS funding, and the idea that any Conservative government would ever willingly give money to the NHS is baffling in the extreme. But nonetheless, these people believed it and they were lied to. But Boris Johnson is now Prime Minister. He has the opportunity to make good on that pledge in a way that he couldn't as Foreign Secretary. In order to try and con the general public that he is doing this, he has pledged £1.8 billion to 20 hospitals for upgrades, as well as other forms of NHS funding in England. Now, straight away and without any detailed fact-checking, you should smell three rats immediately, I would say. First of all, £350 million a week is £18 billion. So this pledge is about 10% of what he promised in 2016. Where's the rest of the money? Second, this is a one-off payment. Well, EU membership subs weren't a one-off payment, so if that so-called saved money is being used in the NHS, why is that a one-off payment? Why isn't that being an annual figure? And the third thing is that this money is largely being used to upgrade 20 hospitals, which of course is a fraction of the number of hospitals in England. So that just tells you how small a sum £1.8 billion is, and this is what he's doing a lot of. £1 billion here, £2 billion here. It sounds like a lot of money. To an individual, £1 billion is a ridiculous amount of money. But for a national service, it's not really that much money. For government spending, it's not that much money. But the dishonesty goes rather deeper than just those obvious points. Not only is £1.8 billion just 10% of what he said he would give to the NHS during the Brexit campaign, he's not even giving the NHS £1.8 billion. People immediately noticed that for a start, £1 billion of this was money that Theresa May's government had already allocated to the NHS but told them they weren't allowed to spend. So it's not new money. But the government is trying very hard indeed to make it sound like new money. They're saying so. Boris Johnson says, let me be clear, this is new money. When a health minister, Chris Skidmore, was on the Channel 4 News, he was insisting that this was new money as well. The journalist interviewing him, Krishnan Gurumurthy, put forward the notion that this was money that hospitals already had. They already had it, but had not previously been allowed to spend it. They were now being allowed to spend it, but that doesn't make it new money because it's money they already had. Now, after spending several minutes trying to repeat that it was new money, Gurumurthy trapped him by insisting a yes or no answer to whether or not the statement he has made was untrue. This is something more journalists should do because ministers will happily mislead, but they cannot tell an outright objective lie or they lose their jobs. He had to answer that the statement made was not untrue. So despite the fact that Skidmore and other ministers will happily go all over the country from news interview to news interview saying that this is new money, he has on this news channel had to admit that it's not new money when pressed by a real news organisation. So what has prompted this outrageous claim? Well, the Conservatives like to project the image that people in the UK don't like paying taxes, and they use that as justification for cutting taxes, mostly to the wealthy. But this is simply not true. Polls regularly show a majority of the population in this country appreciate taxes if they are used to provide good quality public services. We don't really fancy it going into private hands, but we want it being used on good quality public services. A recent poll said that over 60% would want to pay more tax if it meant the NHS was being properly funded. So the Conservative view is completely out of touch with British sensibilities. So what do? Simple. You say that you believe in the NHS, you say that you're giving it record funding, but in reality hide the lack of investment in lies and misleading accounting, and you say that the NHS is still failing despite this record funding, and that in reality, the service is unsustainable. In time, you hope that you can make the NHS seem like a failed project and use that as an excuse to abolish it in full of fully privatised healthcare. Something both Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson have said that they support. So just as with every past Conservative Prime Minister, Boris Johnson will insist that he is providing new money to public services when in actual fact he's reducing it where he can and certainly not increasing it. It's a bit like when Theresa May supposedly increased the NH budget a couple of years ago, but that wasn't new money either. She took it from social services and then told the NHS that they would have to deliver the services that money was previously allocated for. Passing the already piss-poor amount of funding from one pot to another is a fairly common way to fool the public into thinking that they're funding these public services when they're not. Another common trick also used by May is to announce an increase in the budget over a period of years that relies upon an upturn in tax receipts that never comes, of course, with Conservative policies. That way you get to say you've increased the budget, but you don't have to pay a penny because when it comes down to it, that money won't be there because you've based it on assumptions that are not true. Boris Johnson has also been engaging in a little bit of this as well. You almost feel like revisiting Jerry Maguire when discussing Conservative funding. Show me the money. They can never show you the money when you really press them, as the interview with Chris Scudmore ably demonstrated. So if 1 billion of this so-called new money isn't new at all, what about the remaining £850 million of the pledge? Is that at least new? No, doesn't seem so either. But that remaining money seems to be coming from an already agreed budget, but elsewhere, a different pot this time. The only way that anybody is able to bend the truth to make this money sound like it's new money is by arguing that, well, the NHS wasn't allowed to spend it, so the fact that Boris Johnson has now said they can spend it means they're getting to spend money that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. As someone noted on Twitter, it's the equivalent of giving someone cash, then banning them from spending it, only to expect cheers and jubilation when you later decide actually they can spend it after all. That is literally what's happening. And I keep seeing people say, how can government expect people to buy this? Well, people do buy it. That's how it works. That's why people keep voting for Conservative governments. Other political parties campaign on a series of promises and stick by them as best they can when given the opportunity to follow through. You may agree or disagree on their spending priorities, but they do at least follow them. But Conservatives don't. They promise one thing and then do another. And when you call them out later on, they just lie to your face. They know that people in the know can't be fooled. They're not going to be fooled by these lies. But that doesn't matter. They only need to fool the majority of the population who don't bother to check the facts and put any disagreement down to political posturing. So Boris Johnson has not provided any additional funding to the NHS. Expect similar tricks to be employed on each and every one of his spending promises. Apart from reducing the tax burden, I believe he's going to do that. The bottom line is he's trying to crash our economy. He's following a course that is intended to crash our economy. There isn't going to be any money without obscene borrowing at a very high rate of interest. So, hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.